Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hannah Lin. I'm the Chinese Program Director here at the West Virginia University. So welcome to our panel and session. We have two speakers for this section. The first one is Ms. Jenna Mizard, and she's from the Forest Buck International, and she's going to give us an overview of the humanitarian legacy of Forest Buck. And then our second presenter here is Professor Zhang Dan Li, and coming all the way from Nanjing Normal University, Nanjing, China, is one of my favorite cities. And she's going to talk about Pro-Islam International and the Pro-Islam studies in China. Each presenter will have 30 minutes, so if you have any questions, please hold your questions. Wait till the end. We'll have a 20 minutes question and answer. We'll be able to have a discussion and answer all your questions. So first of all, please welcome Ms. Mizard.
Hello, thank you. Thank you, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to share with you information about Pearl S. Buck International, which is the organization that continues the humanitarian legacy of Pearl S. Buck. To start, I just wanted to give you a little background of what I really see as the underlying factors and reason Pearl Buck created the humanitarian legacy that continues today. And I start with this nice photograph of Pearl Buck with her arm around her father, her sister Grace, her mother, and her aunt in the background, because I wanted to make the point that Pearl Buck grew up under the Confucian studies and the Chinese ways as a girl with blonde hair, blue eyes in China. So she knew very well what it was like to be a minority. And this penetrated her entire life and her humanitarian legacy that continues today. When she came to the United States for college, one of the things that I remember her saying in her writing is that no one ever asked her about China. She didn't get many questions about her upbringing. And so I think maybe that had a little something to do with Pearl Buck wanting to tell everyone about China and the Eastern ways that she was so familiar with. But also, I think there's another reason, because Pearl Buck felt Chinese inside her heart, and she wanted other people to understand China as she did. When she came to the United States in 1934, she bought this property, Green Hills Farms, which I'll show you a picture after this, what it looked like at the end after all of her additions to it. It was pretty small when she came in 1934, and she chose this location because it was close to her publisher in New York City, and it was also close to Vineland Training School in New Jersey. It also at the time was really an artist belt where many people came from New York, famous artists and authors, to have a place to relax. It was a very rural area with hills, and when Pearl Buck purchased a property, she said it reminded her of China. One of the things that Pearl Buck could never quite find peace with was the racism that existed in the United States when she came to live in the United States. She was very, very sensitive about racism because she knew what it was like to live as a minority in another country. So the racism that she found in the country, she took every opportunity to speak against, to write about, and to took up many causes, all related to racism in one way or another. She married Richard Walsh, who was also a very liberal thinker. He was an intellect, and they were intellectually equal and had a marriage of love, and one that involved many children. You can see in the bottom left corner, there's a picture of Carol, Pearl Buck's birth daughter with John Lossing Buck, and then you see Janice, the first adopted daughter, who was adopted by John Lossing Buck, but then later was raised as Richard Walsh's daughter. And then you see Richard and John and Edgar, Jean, Henriette, and Joanna. And then on the back row there are three of the foster children that lived in the house that the children are rather close with. Although there are many foster children that come and visit, even to this day, just on a regular tour of the Pearl Buck house. And they say, oh yeah, I lived in the house for a couple months. Oh, you did, and we try to get the information and add it to our archives. Pearl Buck was widely written about adoption because she had adopted so many children. And I always say she was the Oprah Winfrey of the day. She wrote in Ladies' Home Journal and all the old women magazines. And one of the themes that she wrote about quite regularly was how you could love, adopt a child just like you could your very own child. And so she was very well known in the field of adoption, and she received a telephone call from a social worker and said, Miss Buck, there's this Eastern Indian little child who's going to age out in the orphanage, and there's no one that'll adopt him. Because back in 1941, if you were biracially orphan child, you were considered unadoptable. It was the era of secrets in adoption, and so like features were matched with like parents, and so there weren't very many biracial couples that were looking to adopt children, so the children literally lived their lives in orphanages. So Pearl Buck got a call from the social worker and said, you have to help with this child. Of course, it was a form of racism, and so Pearl Buck took indignation about that, and she called her friends together, Oscar Hammerstein, James Michener, the Burpees from the Burpee Seed Company, all the power people that lived in Bucks County at the time, and she educated them about the plight of these children. And together, they formed the board of directors of Welcome House. And Welcome House was the first adoption agency in the United States that focused on the adoption of biracial children. Originally, Welcome House started out as a group home. Right next to Pearl Buck's property, there was an old stone farmhouse, which Oscar Hammerstein actually paid the mortgage off and gave it and donated it to Welcome House. And what Pearl Buck did was she had a tutor from the local high school that tutored her children, Papa Yoder, and she asked him, would you please take some of these children? You and your wife could raise them. You're such wonderful parents, and you can live in this house adjacent to the property. And they were wonderful people, so they did do just that. They ended up bringing 10 children into their home. By the way, only one of them was ever legally adopted, and that was the youngest child, Sumi. The rest of them lived in a foster care situation, although they had the Yoder name. They registered for school as a Yoder, and they actually thought they were adopted. I mean, it was just like a legal thing that never really got done until the youngest one, for some reason, it legally had to be done. So Pearl Buck then, with the board of directors at Welcome House, formed a second group home not too far away from her home. And then it was after that time that people started coming to Pearl Buck and saying, we'll adopt these children. So the second group home was phased out, but the Yoders would not part with any of their children because they came to their home as their child and they refused to part with them. It was after that point in time, Welcome House adoption became one-to-one with a couple and a child who came into the program. So Pearl Buck is credited as being the first woman that really changed the racial barriers to adoption in the United States. After that period of time, the organization started doing adoption one-to-one with a couple and with a child, and the program was going on. And the board of directors started meeting and saying, what should we do? What is our next project? Should we start focusing on the colored children that are in orphanages because no one's adopting them? But then someone brought to their attention all of these children that are in Korea, born from American servicemen and Korean women, they're streetless, they're homeless, they're dying. They're just abandoned by their parents. They don't have an education, there's not enough food to feed them, they're being discarded. So Pearl Buck went to Korea on an exploration to find out what exactly were the needs of the children, and then Welcome House Board of Directors decided they would expand the charter from a national adoption agency to an international adoption agency. And so Korea was the first location where international children started coming to the United States. And I'm never sure if Welcome House was the first international adoption agency or the second, because Holt Children's Services in Oregon also has well written about also going to Korea around the same time or prior. I'm not quite sure the years, but there were 2 agencies that were doing adoption from Korea, ensuring that these children born of American servicemen could come to their home countries and have a chance at life. I just wanted to point out this little picture because this little picture here on the bottom right here is David Yoder, and he was the little Eastern Indian boy that Pearl Buck got the telephone call about, and he was raised to call Pearl Buck Graham. They had a very close relationship. He lived right next door to her, would often go in the house and whenever he wanted to see her. And she actually found a donor to pay for his college education, and he went to a local university. And I had the honor and privilege of working with him as chairman of the board of Pearl S. Buck International just about 4 years ago. So after Welcome House started doing the adoptions overseas, it went to Korea, and then it went to a few other countries where there were also American servicemen. And then Pearl Buck realized that there was a phenomenon because some of the mothers would not give their children up for adoption, but yet they had no opportunity for an education. So in Korea, for example, the registration of birth goes by the father. And if you're not a citizen and you don't have a father, you cannot go to school. So these children they were not being educated, they couldn't enroll in school, but yet their mothers still wanted to raise them for the most part. So Pearl Buck made the decision that she would create the foundation with the sole purpose of focusing on these children who she said, quote, in her founding statement, who faced discrimination because of the circumstances of their birth. And so she created the Pearl S. Buck Foundation, and she said the first project will be the Amerasian child. She went to Korea and she actually set up an educational institution and also an orphanage. It was called the Opportunity Center. And in 1965, there were 200 students enrolled at the Opportunity Center, and about 95 of them were residential. That meant that they did not live with their parents, they lived in the school. So this was the beginning of the foundation's work. Where did Pearl Buck get the money to start this orphanage in Korea and send 200 children to school? Well, she started it through a program called child sponsorship. And she matched one child in the orphanage to one donor back in the United States who paid $15 a month, which paid for the child's education, health care, and basic and nutrition. And after the program was established, she then moved the program to other countries in Asia, which I'll tell you about in a minute where she actually moved. But I wanted to point out that in, did you say something? In sorry about that. On her 75th birthday, she bequeathed her home, Green Hills Farm, to go to the foundation upon her death. And the sole purpose of that was to continue the programs of the Pearl S. Buck Foundation. This is a look in at the Pearl Buck house. This is actually the Good Earth desk. And the little typewriter on there in the corner was the typewriter where she typed 2 manuscripts of the Good Earth in an attic in Nanjing. And the typewriter she gave to her daughter Janice when she went to college. And Janice used that typewriter to type her papers at college. And then maybe about 10 years or so ago, she donated the typewriter back to the Pearl Buck house. We were really happy to display that on the desk. One of the things that is really interesting about the house is that it became a National Historic Landmark in 1980, but yet it wasn't until the early 2000s that Pearl S. Buck International realized that it really is a very rare cultural treasure. We had consultants come in from Pew and work with us, and they told us that there are about 2,500 National Historic Landmarks in the United States. Only about 300 of them are about a woman's contribution to society. And of those 300, houses, there are only 10 that have an intact collection. That means everything in the home was actually owned by the woman or man that the house represents. So it is a very rare National Historic Treasure because the belongings are hers. And if you walk into her bathroom upstairs and you open the medicine cabinet, you'll see her luster cream, oil of Olay. I mean, it really is like she just went out the door and she's going to be back any minute. So it really is, it's a treasure. So Welcome House continued to do adoption in countries following American servicemen around the globe, and then also other countries where there were not American servicemen. For example, did some work in South America. Until 1991, when the Olympics were in Korea, and Brian Gumbel was doing an expose on all the imports and exports in Korea. And during his presentation, he did a report on Korea's biggest export, its children. The Korean government was really ashamed by that report, and they put an immediate moratorium on adoption from its country. Welcome House had very, very small numbers of children adopted from other countries. Korea was really the original and the large and main program where adoption took place. So Welcome House was about to close its door, but then the board of the Pearl S. Buck Foundation got together with the board of Welcome House and decided that they would merge. So Welcome House then became a program under Pearl S. Buck Foundation, and it did very, smaller numbers of adoption after that point. The Pearl S. Buck Foundation name was changed to Pearl S. Buck International in 1999. A lot of people still call it the foundation. I'm okay with that. It's fine. That's what most people think of it to this day. But legally, we're Pearl S. Buck International. That's really a shame that I can't show you that, because it actually was showing the different offices, and that was fine earlier when I looked at it. Pearl Buck, after going to Korea, as I said, she followed American servicemen around, and she then went to Thailand and started a branch office in Thailand in '67. She went to the Philippines in 1968, started working there. Started working in Okinawa in 1967, but that program closed in 1995. But all of the other programs remained open. She started working in Vietnam in the late 60s as well. So today, these are the countries where we continue the humanitarian programs of Pearl Buck. And our target audience is always children who face discrimination because of the circumstances of their birth. And in each country is a little different who is actually served. And I'll go over in a little bit more detail by country. But the primary goal of our program remains the same as when Pearl Buck started it. And that's that children get their education, their basic nutrition, and their basic health care. So we still do the program the same way through child sponsorship. It's $30 a month now, which when you think about how the cost of living has increased since 1965, it's certainly, the value's not there as it was during Pearl Buck's day, but we do make sure that the children continue their education as a primary goal in the program. In Taiwan, for example, that program serves new immigrant families and their children. So Taiwan has a large importation of foreign brides and laborers in their country. So as a result of that, these young wives will come from Laos or Vietnam or really poor countries, and suddenly they're in Taiwan with Taiwanese culture, different holidays, different language, different everything. So the Pearl S. Buck Foundation in Taiwan actually provides the support to the parents when they come in, and then to the children to ensure that they understand the language, they understand the school, they get tutoring, they have scholarships and so forth. The majority of the funding from Taiwan comes from the government. Pearl S. Buck International does not provide any funding to Taiwan unless it's a direct donation from a donor. Lots of times we'll have somebody Taiwanese that will make a donation for Taiwan and we'll send that money over there. But they became an independent organization in 2002. So they still operate under our standards and they still use our name, but they're raising all their money and they're governed by a local board of directors in Taiwan. China, well, you all know Pearl Buck was not accepted back into China in 1972 when she wanted to go with Richard Nixon. But yet in 2002, we were very happy to take a delegation of 53 people to Zhejiang, China, to learn about Pearl Buck's legacy in China. And how could we be there and learn about her legacy in China without leaving something behind, a legacy of continuing to help children in China? So we started a child sponsorship program in the school where Pearl Buck taught as a child, attended as a child and taught as an adult. And we ensure that these students continue grades 10, 11th, and 12th. The target audience in this school are students whose parents would not be able to pay the tuition for them to go to school grades 10 through 12. So typically in China, public education ends at 9th grade, and so then you have to pay the tuition, and if you need room and board or whatever it is, that's the only way these students will go to school. These kids are really bright students, and so they would just fall through the cracks if they didn't have the opportunity to go to high school. And the program itself has had a wonderful success rate because China then has a system very similar to ours in the United States, where the students can get scholarships, can get student loans, can go to college. So it's like 98% of the students, we call them Pearl Buck scholars at the school, they then go on to college through loans and scholarships. So it's a program that we're really proud of continuing. We also have done some wonderful exchange opportunities with China. We have brought over small groups of students in the Pearl Buck class to spend a week or two with us in the summer. And we had a really exciting grant through the State Department, and it was called Museums Connect, where we connected our high school students in the United States with high school students in Zhejiang, China. Our high school students explored cultural stereotypes about the Chinese in America, and the Chinese students explored cultural stereotypes about Americans in China. And then they had to do a exhibit or curate an exhibit on their findings. We displayed our exhibit at the Pearl Buck House, and they displayed their exhibit at the Pearl Buck Museum in Zhejiang, China. And then the students had a speech contest, and 8 students from China and 8 from the United States traveled to each other's country and did a service project in their country and had a wonderful opportunity to learn about each other's culture. In Vietnam, we primarily work with orphanages. Right now, we're supporting 6 orphanages in Vietnam, and we have, you can see, 758 students last fiscal year that we served. All the students are served through child sponsors, although we do a lot of projects in Vietnam. We also raise money, for example, to do new bathrooms at the orphanage, or playgrounds, or summer programs for the students. We like to see them go to the beach in the summer, just have opportunities that they wouldn't have living inside an orphanage. In the Philippines, it's one of the poorer countries actually that I've visited and seen the poverty that the children live in there. We serve primarily ethnic minorities in the Philippines, and we also have a small population of Amerasians or second-generation Amerasians in the Philippines. And our program in the Philippines is education, because you have to pay tuition to go to school at all levels in the Philippines. And so if you're from a poor family, you do not go to school. Or if you do go to school, you end up dropping out when you're around 10 or 11 or 12 years old because you need to work to bring in some income for the family. So it's a really important program that really makes a difference in the lives of so many children there. We just had a trip to the Philippines, and I went there, and I mean, they don't have refrigeration, electricity in their house. They have to walk miles every day to get their food for the family and miles back. So, I mean, it's life very, very different than most of you could probably even imagine. In Korea, We continue to serve small numbers of numbers of Amerasian children, but mostly multicultural families because there's such a large importation of laborers in Korea. They end up marrying Korean men or women, and then those children face discrimination in their living environments because they're not full-blooded Korean. Although the Korean society is changing now to embrace other cultures, there's still like much old school thinking and much discrimination if you're not full-blooded Korean. Thailand, also great poverty in Thailand. That we serve primarily focus on children and families that are affected by HIV/AIDS. We do a lot of counseling, but again, we pay for the tuition of the students so that they go to school. One of the important things I think that happened to our organization in about 2004 is we received a grant from Pew Charitable Trust, and we actually organized professionally our archives using, current standards. We had some in the Pearl Buck House attic, some in the basement, some in the maintenance shed, some in the office building, and everything was brought together and professionally stored, archived, and our finders online. And we continue to build those archives over the years with things that we have along the way. When I first came to Pearl S. Buck International, the house was in very poor repair. Pearl Buck died in 1973 and nothing had been done until, I guess I started in 2001. So in 2013, we finally finished a $2.8 million restoration of the house. So if you come and visit the house now, you will see that it looks beautiful, like this picture. It looks the way it did when Pearl Buck lived there. So it's in really pristine condition, and I'd love to talk to the birthplace about how we went about preserving that house so we could see the same thing happen here too. In 2014, the Welcome House adoption program officially ended. So we no longer do adoption anymore. And as part of our strategic planning of how can we be relevant now in the future, we can continue the Pearl Buck House, which is open daily for programs, and we continue our overseas programs. But what value do we really have today for our country and for the people and for the students that go to our schools? And so we walked away with a strategic plan that really is embracing diversity and cultural awareness. And we started that by doing our high school leadership program, where the kids learn about leadership and then they do a service project for one of our countries overseas. We have a middle school pilot we're doing in New York City where the students learned about, they were matched one-to-one with students in the Philippines and then ended the school year doing a service project there. We also started doing trips overseas so we can show people Pearl Buck's work, but it's more than that. It's building a bridge between other countries, just like Pearl Buck did. So when we see ourselves continuing our legacy, one of the things that we see as most important is creating that bridge, but more than that, but being someone that seeks a way in our country to bring her words to present times. Because if she was standing here in the room saying some of the things that she wrote back then about race in America, it would be just like she's standing here now saying it. Is so relevant to current times. So we want to take her words and use them to talk about current and relevant issues, and to really almost be an advocate, advocate, and look for social justice in our country, just like Pearl Buck did during her lifetime. So this is a recent trip when I was in the Philippines, and just continuing to help children abroad, but also to have a relevant message for children here in the United States too, so that they can come away with global competence to lead our world that we live in today.
Up next, we will have Professor Zhang from Nanjing Normal University. She's going to talk about Pearl Buck's studies in China. Those who can ready to join us, welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. My topic is Paul Bak's study in 21st century China. Actually, my husband Yao Junwei is and I are the co-authors of this paper. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank the organizing committee for inviting me to present my paper, since I have witnessed the going on of Paul Bak studies in China in the new century. I'd like to share with you what I know of the studies, and I hope that there will be more cooperation in the field among scholars of different countries so as to carry on her legacies, historical, humanitarian, literary, and cultural. Paul Bak studies in China began in the 1930s. Before 1949, there had been enthusiastic criticism, of course, both favorable and unfavorable, in the form of book reviews, translations, and academic papers. However, after 1949, especially in the 1950s and 60s, Paul Bak was criticized very severely, and her works of the Chinese subject matter were almost totally banned before 1978, and her application for a visa to accompany President Richard Nixon in his visit to China in 1972 was rejected because of her so-called distortion, smear, and vilification towards the people of New China and its leaders. With the opening of Sino-American diplomatic relations, Chinese scholars began to re-evaluate Paul Bak and her writings. Since then, they have made a great number of academic achievements and cultivated a new image of her in China. Now, I'd like to talk briefly about the achievements of Paul Bak studies in China, chiefly in the new century, because the first 15 years of new century have witnessed the progress and prosperity of the studies. And then I'm going to present my paper roughly in 5 parts. That is, the conferences, translations, teaching, academic research, and finally, the cultural facilities related to Paul Bak. Now, the first part is the conferences. In 15 years, about 10 national and international conferences and large-scale cultural activities related with Paul Bak and Paul Bak studies have been held in Zhenjiang, Suzhou, and Nanjing, the Chinese cities where she lived, worked, and wrote her masterpieces like The Good Earth. Now, those conferences and activities were held with the joint efforts of Chinese and American institutions, especially Paul Bak International and Zhenjiang Municipal Government. The Chinese and American scholars, as a result, her life and work are far better known and studied in today's China, and Paul Bak studies are promoted to a much higher level. Now, in January 2001, the very first national conference on Paul Bak's literary creation was held in Zhenjiang, China, which marked the beginning of the re-evaluation of Paul Bak. It is regarded as a milestone in the history of Paul Bak studies in China and has helped to promote the studies in China in the following years. Now, and this is my husband. He's very lucky to have the opportunity to attend the first international conference. Now, that's it. And then in October 2002, Paul Bak International Symposium was held in Zhenjiang, China, to celebrate the 110th anniversary of Paul Bak's birth and discuss her writings, covering such fields as language, translation, history, folklore, education, and religion in her works, etc. And then the CEO of Paul Lesbach International, then Janet Minzel, and her husband, the wife and husband, and then Paul Bach's daughter and son, that means Janice Walsh and Edgar Walsh, and other scholars and friends attended the symposium. And then in June 2005, Paul Lesbach International Conference was held in Zhenjiang, China, to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the victory of China's anti-Japanese war. And Janet Minzer and John Lom from Paul Lesbach International, together with other American delegates, attended the conference. And then in 2008, there were a series of activities hosted by Zhenjiang Paul Bach Association to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the winning of Nobel Prize in Literature by Paul Bach. And at the opening ceremony, Janet Minzer made a speech in which she said that it was a good opportunity for all the people devoted to carrying on the legacies of Paul Bach to learn from each other and to promote the mutual understanding. And in December 2010, International Symposium on Paul Bach and her husband John Lawson Bach was held at Suzhou University, Anhui Province, where John Lawson worked for some time, and Janet Minzer was present. And then in May 2012, an international conference, Paul Bach and her Nanking Years, was held at Nanjing University, and Janet Minzer was invited to make a speech. And then many Chinese and American scholars and Paul Bach studies, including Professor Peter Kang, were invited to present their papers. And during the conference, inauguration ceremony of Paul Lesbach Memorial House was held. And then in June 2012, an international conference was held to celebrate the 120th anniversary of Paul Bach's birth. Besides all the speeches and discussions about Paul Bach and her work, Xu Xiaoxia, president of Zhenjiang Paul Bach Association, and Janet Minzer unveiled the stamp album for the 120th anniversary of Paul Bach's birth, personalized stamp, and the first issue of commemorative envelope. In September 2013, Paul Bach cultural exchange programs, including academic forum, were conducted in Zhenjiang, China. And Janet Minzer and other delegates from Paul Lesbach International attended the forum. And Hilary Sperling from the Great Britain, Steve Rahman from the United States, and Yao Junwei from China were invited to make their speeches, and they accepted a group interview. In September 2015, Paul Bach cultural exchange activities were held, including Paul Lesbach International Symposium hosted by Jiangsu University in Zhenjiang. And Janet Minzer and other delegates from Paul Lesbach International participated in the activities. And Professor Yao Junwei made a speech at the conference. The second part is about the Chinese translations of Paul Bach's works. There had been translations of Paul Bach's works in the 1930s and 40s, but most of them were out of print or prohibited for ideological reasons. Since the 1980s, new Chinese translations of her works have been published, particularly her representative books such as The Good Earth, East Wing, West Wing, etc. At the turn of the century, a collection of Paul Buck's works was translated and printed. In addition, in the first 15 years, there have been more Chinese translations of her writings, so that more Chinese scholars who are not so good at English can refer to the Chinese versions for their studies, and thus helping the related studies to flourish in China. The Chinese translations included the following. The first is The Good Earth trilogy. Is reprinted by People's Literature Publishing House in 2010. Imperial Woman, the story of the last Empress of China, published by Orient Publishing House Center in Shanghai in 2010. The Mother, also published by Orient Publishing Center in Shanghai in 2010. Pavilion of Women, published by Shanghai Translation Publishing House in 2003. Tell the People, published by Guangxi Normal University Press in 2003. Paul Buck on the Chinese Novel, edited by my husband Yao Junwei and published by Nanjing University Press in 2012. Part 3 is about teaching Paul Buck in China. Paul Buck's short story, Barren Spring. This morning, a gentleman said, we should ask the young people to read Paul Buck's short story to make more people to know this great writer. Actually, Paul Buck's short story, Barren Spring, was taught in China in the 1930s, so early, which marked the beginning of the teaching of her works in China. The teaching was resumed in the 1980s because of the, I think everyone knows why, the reason. And then the teaching was resumed in the 1980s. Christmas Day in the Morning was included in college English compiled by Professor Hu Wenzhong, and this is the cover of the course book. And then A Date to Dickens was included in a course book for English majors edited by Professor Li Guanyi, and this is the cover of the course book. I think my husband had taught this textbook. And then Professor Liu Haiping from Nanjing University and his students discussed Paul Buck's life and works with students from Paul Buck's alma mater, Randolph-Macon Women's College, on the internet. In 2005, Yao Junwei offered a course for about 20 MA candidates, and in it, Paul Buck's representative works like The Good Earth trilogy, East Wing, West Wing, The Mother, The King Folk, The Dragon Seed, and some selected short stories were discussed. The students discussed them in class and wrote papers and presented them. At the end of the semester, a selected group of them were published. They were published in a special column of Paul Buck Studies in Journal of Jiangsu University. And this course got a certificate of awards and honors. And this is the certificate. And my husband is very proud of it. In 2016, Christmas Day in the Morning Again, this short story is included in New Standard College English and Integrated Course Book 3. There are altogether 4 books. A national textbook published by Foreign Language Teaching and Research Press in Beijing. It is used by more than 100 universities or colleges all over China. And we use this textbook at our university this semester. I will teach this course book. With those efforts, an increasing number of Chinese students of different levels have become more familiar with Pearl Buck's life and work, thus coming to know her cross-cultural and humanitarian enterprise and spirit much better. Meanwhile, emerging Pearl Buck scholars have thus received special academic training, and they are playing an important part in Pearl Buck studies in 21st century China. The next part is about Pearl Buck studies in 21st century China. The first point is official recognition. The new achievements of Pearl Buck studies are represented by the National Cihai, that means lexicon, and Encyclopedia of China. In several editions of the 2 national reference books, Pearl Buck's works was harshly denunciated and dismissed as biased and untrue pictures about China, Chinese people, and Chinese culture. In the last editions, however, such denunciations have been deleted, and her writings about China are re-evaluated in a more objective way. Her support of the anti-Japanese war is greatly appreciated, and her role in the cross-cultural communication is officially recognized. And what's more, there are several documentary series about Pearl Buck at CCTV. These are the links. And then next is academic achievements. Besides this, there have been lots of Pearl Buck studies by PhD candidates and other scholars from many different disciplines such as literary studies, history, philosophy, comparative literature and culture, anthropology, film adaptation, and even art criticism. This is an exhibition about the poems, paintings, and calligraphy on or about Pearl Buck. My husband and I went to a visit. And so far, the monographs on Pearl Buck published in China have made use of different literary and cultural critical methods, covering her fictional and non-fictional writings, those works related with China in particular, and arriving at different conclusions instead of a monotone of ideology. And in publishing and the related achievements, many publishing houses are very supportive and have published about 10 collections of papers on Pearl Buck, 8 of which are compiled by Zhenjiang Pearl Buck Association. Meanwhile, special columns have been launched, notably Pearl Buck Studies by Journal of Jiangsu University in Zhenjiang. The special column has published more than 110 papers in 15 years, including the Chinese versions of some papers by American scholars which is itself a symbol of cultural exchange which Paul Buck advocated in her writings. And Yao Junwei has been the special editor of this column. And then the last part is about the cultural facilities related to Paul Buck. Besides the academic researches, some cultural sites or facilities related to Paul Buck have been established or renovated, such as Paul Buck formal residences and the others. Yeah, this is Paul Buck's former residence in Huai'an, a small city in Jiangsu province. We all know that it is the first stop in China for the family. We happen to know this house and had the pictures taken this summer. It is now rented by a private hospital. Yeah, that's it. Inside, not very well kept, yeah, not very well kept. Yeah, the second, this is Paul Buck's former residence in Zhenjiang, Jiangsu province. Paul Buck lived in this city for 18 years before she came back to the States for her college education, and she could even speak the dialect of the city. We have been there many times, the residence. And then our family lived in this city for about 14 years before we went to Nanjing, another city where Paul Buck lived and worked and wrote her masterpiece. Now this is in Zhenjiang. And next, this is Paul Buck's former residence in Mount Lushan, yeah, Jiangxi province. It is a place for the family to stay for their summer vacation. Our family went there one summer several years ago. Now this is inside. And then this is Paul Buck's former residence in Nanjing, Jiangsu province. It is actually on campus of Nanjing University, where she wrote her masterpiece, The Good Earth. And now we live in this city. This is my son in the house. And it's me. We went there. Yeah, that's it. And then this is Paul Buck's former residence in Suzhou, Anhui province. It is now a hospital. It is said that they built 2 houses of this kind and only one remains now. There is a sign on the wall now saying it is the Paul Buck's Memorial. We went there several years ago, saying the building was built in 1913. Yeah, that's it. We also have Paul Buck class in Zhenjiang, second middle school. That means 从始女中. Yeah, actually Janet Minzer is the honorary president of the middle school. They had a lot of activities there. Yeah, Minzer with the students. Yes. And then what's more, in Zhenjiang, we also have Paul Square. This is Paul Square. And Philanthropy Pavilion. And even Paul Bridge. And also Paul Buck Cultural Park. It is only the layout yet to be constructed. Yeah, to sum up, it might be said that the Chinese scholars of Paul Buck studies have made many remarkable achievements, especially in the 21st century. I fully believe that with more efforts on the part of scholars and cultural administrations in and outside of China, Paul Buck as a cross-cultural resource will be more fully utilized, which will in turn help us carry on her multiple legacies. That means to realize her beautiful dream of all men are brothers, in our age of globalization. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zhang. Now we're going to start our question and answer session. We have about 20-25 minutes. We can make it to half an hour if you have more questions.
I wonder if I could ask a question.
Would you, would you,
If you have questions.
yes, to, our crossbook, yes.
I was wondering, in China, you were mentioning all of the homes of Pearl Buck, and do you in China have a national recognition for historic houses? Like in this country, we have a National Register of Historic Places. The Pearl Buck House in Percy is one, and the Pearl Buck Birthplace is one too. Is there a national registry in China?
Yeah.
For Professor Zhang.
Yes.
You two can, you're
You can
welcome
answer
to
the question.
come
Well, I know
here.
that they have, it's the Pearl Buck House in Zhenjiang is a cultural heritage. And there's like 4-star ratings, and I think it's maybe 2-star rating is, so I think that's the system that they use.
Guess it's a tourism
Yeah,
landmark.
yeah, it's like, they call it a cultural heritage is what my understanding is. And there's different like stars to rank, I guess, the significance.
Can I answer your question?
Does that answer your question?
That answers the question.
All right, anyone?
I wonder who wrote those words, those characters. 镇江崇实女子中学. You know?
A famous,
Calligrapher?
Yeah.
yeah, calligrapher
I think the local, calligrapher in Zhenjiang.
in Zhenjiang, yeah.
Someone else?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you could put this Pearl Buck phenomenon in the Zhenjiang and also Nanjing area, right? It's very clear due to your excellent work that there is a kind of recognition, right? That's
Yeah.
built for all these activities. I wonder if you can give us any parallels. Are there other writers who, like Pearl Buck, were banned, disliked, rejected for a period of time, but have come back with a profile like this? Or are there other similar stories like that? Because these are kind of like new shoots coming up in the new reign, right? So I'm just curious if you could set this in a wider perspective for us to tell us about other writers. Let me say one more thing to give you a little bit of my perspective on this. I had a chance to go to Tianjin a few years ago.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I wish I knew more about the playwright Cao Yu than in fact I do. I don't know a great deal. But it was very clear that Tianjin has embraced Cao Yu as one of their native sons, a very important playwright who has
You mean Chinese playwright?
the Chinese playwright, that's right. He has a presence in Tianjin that is part of Tianjin's face to the world.
Yes.
If I can put it that way.
Yes.
So I'm just curious, can you give me any
Yes,
other
of course we
examples
can.
like that?
Yeah, when Police Buck got his Nobel Prize, I think some of the not the Chinese, but the American also writers, also very famous writers, say something bad to about Police Buck,
Yes.
saying that she should not have won the Nobel Prize. And I think Lin Yutang did something good, or they had a very good relationship. And then Lin Yutang, during that time, Lin Yutang is not considered quite high. And then after that, say Lin Yutang now also has his former residence.
He has come after.
Yeah, yeah, Lin Yutang.
Yes.
Yeah, experience the same, yes, stage. Yeah.
Actually, Pearl Buck is a case. We are doing actually kind of a case study. in Chinese history of translation of foreign writers and other authors. We have many examples. Some of these were or have been overlooked. But with in the new phase of in Chinese history, that is from 1976, a lot of those authors they have come back to us. So even we have new recognition of studies, and we have included them in the history of Chinese literature or Chinese history of Chinese translation. Okay. That's a good point. We are going to build a kind of a framework, and Pubak is only one example. Yes, very good. Thank you.
Are there any other writers like her that would also be known to American audiences? Lin Yutang would be an example. Is there a kind of effort to build up Lin Yutang's, a recognition for Lin Yutang's achievement?
Yeah.
In one of the provinces in China, in Fujian province, China, there is kind of memorial, including his former house, former residence, and so on. And also we have some exhibitions of the writings and so on. But actually many similar cases, like Wu Xun, very famous in Shanghai, in Beijing, or also in Zhejiang province. We have similar residences and exhibitions.
Thank you for tuning in. Next question.
Just as part of her question, many of the very prominent books in the United States are translated and published in China. You can go to an airport anywhere in China, and there'll be bookstores filled with some of the more prominent writers. Those of us that are published in China, one of the things you watch out for is sometimes the Chinese editor will go through the work. And one of the sort of ethical questions is if the censor comes back and says, we need to eliminate that paragraph or this page or something like that, then the big struggle is to have it published in China, which is a huge market. Are you willing to have it published in the sense that you maybe cut out this or that which they might find offensive? But other than that, I think most people are surprised that there's a very, very wide body of translated literature, very readily available in China.
The other thing I was thinking of to answer your question is maybe about 8 years ago, China did an online survey to identify the most influential Westerners, and I know Pearl Buck was voted number 13 as the most influential Western, and this is from Chinese people, which had like a huge response rate. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but if you Google to find that survey, you may see the other people listed there that have been rehabilitated or embraced by China today. So.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a difference, right, between what's popular.
Yeah, you can see other Westerners that are popular.
First of all, I'd have two questions. One, what is the vision of what the Pearl S. Buck Cultural Theme Park will be? I don't know what you or your country think of a cultural theme park. It looks like there are going to be trees, and it looks like there are going to be walkways and a pleasant place to be. Is it going to be more than that, or is that basically what the plan is?
I can speak to that. I have the blueprint of the park. We had a delegation visit us of the architects working on the project just in the last month, and it's going to be an expanded Pearl Buck Museum, which will be 2 floors to allow for education classes and programs. It'll be the historic Pearl Buck House. It'll be a Pearl Buck gift shop to sell her books and other artifacts. Restrooms, and then like a garden, just a big garden area. And then there's going to be a big office complex on there as well. So that's all it is.
So hopefully we will get a chance to visit.
Yeah.
The second question is about the translations. I see you translated Christmas Day in the Morning.
Yes.
And the Dickens, which I'm really appreciative of that because I refer to that in every one of my tours at PSB International. But the question is about how to get, if there might be more translations of books where the setting is, say, for example, The Townsman, where the setting is Europe coming to America and things like that.
Yeah.
Professor John, do you see?
Would you answer the question? Yes.
Professor
Yeah.
Yao,
Yeah.
any more translation work?
Yeah, actually, just now she mentioned some of the titles of the translation from ancient to Chinese. In the translation, there are several factors involved in translation, the copyright law, right? So we do not have a lot of translation of the short stories. I think, to my knowledge, we only have The First Wife and Other Stories, which was translated and published before 1949.
I see.
But after that, no, only just a few. Christmas Day in the Morning, and then not even the Barren Spring, right? Barren Spring was translated and taught before 1949, in the 1940s. So I think this is one of the most difficult factors. Another one is maybe we do not have a lot of translators who would like to do the translation of short stories. It is not very good for fame building or reputation. And besides, maybe the publishing houses, they are not willing to buy the copyright.
I see.
But it's very difficult to translate short stories. I have translated some novels, but I have never translated short stories into Chinese. It's very difficult, and the publishers, the readers, they do not recognize your contributions. So, and maybe this is also one of the reasons. But I believe if the problem of the issue of copyright is solved, more scholars, more students like my son will do that job. I'm told that there are some Chinese translators who are doing the translation now because the copyright of the books will expire in 2023, right? 50 years later, right?
2023, yeah.
So some translators, they are doing some of the
10 years
work.
later.
I believe we have more translations in the coming future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the subtle things different about publishing in China versus the US is that traditionally in China, they expect the author to pay the publishing house subsidies. So one of the things when you're negotiating with the Chinese publishing house, they expect you to pay a subsidy. That's when your agent steps in and says no. That's one thing, in addition to the copyright issues, is that, and I'm sure with someone as famous as Provost, it's not quite the same, but still, it's a different dynamic in terms of publishing in China. It creates a different set of barriers than say in the United States or something.
Yes, Janet, in the United States, you often see an American couple with an Asian child, usually a daughter. And I'm wondering, is Welcome House the first institution to focus on the adoption of children from Asia? And even though I know that they focused on mixed race children specifically, but are they the first, or is
It was either Pearl S. Buck International or Holt Children's Services in Oregon.
So before that, you just didn't see that
No,
phenomenon?
yeah,
at all?
no.
And why did they close up a few years ago?
Oh, because our primary countries where we did adoption became more advanced economically, and there wasn't the need to do the work. So in Korea, for example, the numbers of children were reduced by the government. There was a quota so that it would be like 0% eventually. And in China, for example, now it's more economically advanced. They really crack down on any baby buying or corruption. And they just had such like 7-year wait period for families to adopt from China. So it wasn't economically feasible for us to continue the high overhead of doing adoption work, because you have to have master's level social workers to do the work. You have to have very expensive liability insurance. And then you collect this certain amount of money, but then when it goes on, you have to provide family support for 7 years, and the money's not coming in anymore. So yeah, so it was just a really difficult and painful financial decision, but one that we went back and looked at Pearl Buck's words, that she longed for the day when there wouldn't be a need for adoption. So we resolved to ourselves that we fulfilled that part of her, her legacy, that mission was fulfilled.
They're short of babies themselves. You just change the one-child policy.
I have a question that refers to comparative literary analysis of Pearl Buck's works. I know that every culture has its own sort of set of symbolism or meanings that one analyzes in a way. For example, like an apple is a very clear symbol to Westerners. But I was wondering if perhaps in reading American scholarly work compared to Chinese scholarly work on Pearl Buck's works, if you saw that there were some symbols that are very clear culturally to Chinese people that might have gone right over Westerners' heads because we just don't have the cultural background to recognize it as something.
For example, the earthen god. The earthen god is a very typical Chinese image, embedded in Chinese culture, especially traditional. For example, if people they have rich harvest, they go to the earthen god to pray, to worship, to light some incense. So maybe I don't think this is too familiar to Western readers. So this is one example. There are some other examples in the Good Earth trilogy, and also those novels of Chinese subject, like Eastward Wind, West Wind, and like Pavilion of Women. Pavilion of Women, in that novel, there is a very a description of culture, just like the classical Chinese novel that is Hong Lou Meng, Red Dream Mansion. This kind of image, maybe, I don't know, but maybe it's difficult to find in Western countries. So this is typical of Chinese image of kind of content.
Just to add a little bit to his answer, peony, I would say, is the Chinese national
peony,
flower,
yeah.
because the legend goes that it's the only flower who dared to defy the emperor's ordeal. Open, okay, bloom, peony didn't, okay. And Pearl Buck wrote a novel named Peony. It's actually the name of a maid in Jewish family's house. And the whole novel is really about the assimilation of the Jews in China, the Chinese Jews. They assimilated into Chinese culture completely. And they married Chinese people and they became Chinese. And they abandoned the synagogue. Some of them even became Muslims. And towards the end of the Second World War, we even helped them to go to Israel to reestablish their country. But they didn't want to go. The Chinese Jews said, we were happy here, so they didn't leave China. And so that's really something very, very special.
In China.
In cultural exchange.
Yes.
So there was, I believe, at least 2 or maybe more conferences were held in Kaifeng to study this phenomenon that the Jews assimilated into Chinese culture. And the book is Peony.
That is actually the so-called the flower of our country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. National flower.
Yes.
I hadn't been aware before of how the title of The Good Earth was translated in Chinese. It looked like Big Earth, whatever they said.
Good Earth, yeah.
I mean, I guess this also touches on the issue of possibly cultural. Why is it not translated Good Earth?
Actually, we have several titles for that novel. I mean, for the Chinese version of that novel.
Yeah.
We have, in Chinese,
基地
Da Di,
基地
Jie Di, and also Fu Di. Fu means happiness. Yeah.
Fortune.
So different translators,
Happy.
they have different understandings. But they have, input their associations or their understanding of the connotations of the Good Earth. I mean, the land was so important for Chinese founders. Professor Liao Kang also mentioned that.
The
The
land,
importance
yeah.
of earth, the importance of earth reform. It is vital, right? So some translators they use 好地, 好 means good, the good earth, right? And also 福地, happiness, and then 大地, big. It is very spacious, right? Very open. Yeah.
So anybody, I don't know, viewing like the covers of these books in a bookstore bookstore or a library, so they would understand it's the same book.
Yeah,
Is that
Oh,
correct?
yeah, the same book
Because
with
usually
different
after the Chinese title, they have the English title. So the titles are bilingual actually.
Yeah,
Do they make those different names up because of the copyright issue?
yeah. The translators maybe.
Yeah.
Yes. Actually, different translators they have different tastes.
Yeah.
Right. And we have, it's difficult for us to argue about taste.
Da Di, I mean, compared to other translation, is already existing vocabulary in Chinese.
Yeah.
It's more commonly used, and it does have a positive connotation too, even though it does not have the word good or fortune. Other questions?
No, no.
I have one question about all those former residents of Pearl Bag.
Yeah.
It seems there are so many. And but did you mention the one in Anhui,
Yeah,
Suxian?
yeah, Suzhou.
Suzhou, you
Yes,
didn't mention that.
yeah.
Okay. But I know that the one at Zhenjiang
Yeah.
is really a like a museum, a
Yes.
former resident. But all the others are still in function for as hospitals or some other things. They're not
Yeah,
really
yeah.
No.
for visit.
No, Nanjing is an
Nanjing,
historic.
on the
Nanjing
campus of
Hawaii.
Nanjing
And
University.
Mount Lu, Lushan, is
that's
also
right.
a tourist site.
So these three are for public visit.
Yeah.
visits, okay. But the one in Suzhou.
Suzhou and Huai'an. We found this place, but accidentally this summer, only this summer, we know, and we had some pictures taken.
Yeah.
It is now rented by a private hospital.
I see.
Yeah.
But that's
There is
still-
no sign. There is no sign on the wall. And in Suzhou, there is a sign. Anhui, only
Yeah.
the sign on the wall.
Yeah.
Actually, it is not visited by a police buck visitors. Also a hospital. It is also a hospital now.
So it is really a great revival. And
Yeah.
I cannot think of any other Western writers who enjoyed
China,
this
yeah.
fame or privilege.
Popularity, yeah. Mm.
Quebec is too influential, and now a lot of governments they realize that she is important, especially Xinjiang municipal government, also Nanjing, these two cities, and Montreal.
And she's from West Virginia.
You've talked about copyright a bunch of times, but I'm not exactly clear. Do the Chinese publishers all respect American copyright?
No.
I'm not
We
certain.
do now.
No.
I think so far as I know now, important publishing houses they are very they respect foreign copyrights. Most of them. But maybe I'm not so sure. But maybe
No.
some minor ones or some of the pirates, right?
Yeah.
But anyhow, people's idea of copyrights are stronger and stronger in China. That's for sure.
Yes.
So there was a conference that celebrated both Pearl Buck and Lessing.
John Lossenbach. John
So is
Lossenbach.
his work also being appreciated in China today?
Mhm.
It begins to be studied because of Quebec. People now discover that her husband is John Lossenbach, an agriculturalist. Right? So in China, we have some universities, some agricultural universities in Beijing and Nanjing, especially in Nanjing. They begin to explore his writings because he is a kind of expert, right? Okay, so they began to discover the importance and the function of his monographs, which will help my book, in fact. But it is only kind of beginning. It is not yet known by a lot of scholars and experts.
In Anhui province, in Suzhou, there is a John Lossenbach Memorial Hall, and it's John Lossenbach on one side and Pearl Bach on the other side, but it's the same hall, which recognizes both of their work. And there was a symposium there about John Lossenbach in 2010, maybe, and there was one in Nanjing just about John Lossenbach in 2013.
Oh, I just realized it's a Suzhou, not a
Suzhou,
Suzhou.
Anhui.
Yeah,
not
I was
Suzhou.
thinking of
Yeah,
Suzhou.
Suzhou.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes, Suzhou. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Forgive my Mandarin.
No, yours actually.
Oh, you got mine?
No, yours reminded me. It's
Suzhou.
actually Suzhou.
Yeah.
Yeah, not
yeah.
Suzhou.
You pronounced it
Suzhou.
very well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At first, I was
Anhui province.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not Jiangsu.
Not Jiangsu.
Yeah, Anhui province, not Jiangsu.
Well, our time's up.
Yeah.
Time is up. If we have 5 minutes until the next section will start. And then thank you again, and thank our 2 presenters for this wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. Good job. Nice job.
Very good talk, Tracy.